Hello guys, let's discuss the supply side policies. Sometimes the problem is not on the demand side. Sometimes the problem is supply side. It means that in order to achieve higher economic growth rate, government policies are usually targeted towards management of aggregate demand. In order to achieve economic growth, government usually adopts expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. When government adopts expansionary fiscal and monetary policy, this results in an increase in aggregate demand, and due to an increase in aggregate demand, GDP increases, unemployment rate falls. However, when the economy is already close to full employment level, or it is at full employment level, then demand side policies would only create inflation. Right? When the economy is already close to full employment level or at full employment level, then adopting expansionary fiscal policy or expansionary monetary policy would result in higher inflation, higher imports, and low level of exports. Because when aggregate demand would increase rapidly due to too much expansion by the government, then that would increase the prices only at full employment level, inflation only, there would be no increase in GDP. So it means that the problem lies on the supply side. Whenever aggregate demand is increasing but there is no increase in GDP, it clearly means that problem is not on the demand side, problem is on the supply side. Then it is better to adopt supply side policies, not the demand side policies. Supply side policies are the policies which are targeted towards the removal of supply bottlenecks, which means the barriers which are there in increasing the production of goods and services. And the problem is the lack of resources. The problem is that private sector firms are facing some problems due to which they are unable to come back into production. So when government would address these issues, this would be referred as supply side policies. Right? I'm repeating my point that supply side policies are targeted towards to remove supply bottlenecks, to increase the quantity and quality of resources, to facilitate private sector so that they come into production, they invest more in the business, and they work for the economic growth. Supply side policies would actually shift the aggregate supply curve rightward. Demand side policies were increasing aggregate demand, but now since there is full employment level, an increase in aggregate demand is creating problem of inflation, then supply side policies must be adopted. And when government will adopt supply side policies, the long run aggregate supply curve would shift rightward. When a long run aggregate supply curve would shift rightward, this would mean that potential of the economy is increasing. And when potential of the economy is increasing, then obviously GDP will increase. So I don't have the facility of a diagram here, but keep this in mind that whenever we adopt supply side policies, the long run aggregate supply curve would shift outward, which would mean that potential of the economy is increasing. Or I can also put it forward like this, that whenever the government is adopting supply side policies, the short run aggregate supply curve is shifting rightward, And when short-run aggregate supply curve will shift rightward, price level will go down, GDP will increase, unemployment rate would fall, and when price level is going down, exports will increase and imports would fall. The one good thing about supply side policy is that it solve all the problems simultaneously as compared to demand side policies which solve some problem but also create some problem. The problem of demand side policies is that they solve some problem and they create some problem. They are like allopathic medicines that when they are taken, they cure some problem, but simultaneously they create some problem. But supply side policies are like homeopathic medicines which do not create a side effect, right? And they solve all the problems. At least on so-called basis, we usually assume that homeopathic medicines do not have a side effect. I don't know what exactly is, but I'm just referring it to. So when supply side policies would be adopted, short and aggregate supply curve would also shift rightward, resulting in increased GDP, reduced unemployment, lower price level, and when lower price level is coming, exports will increase and imports would fall. These are the effects of supply side policies. Now let me discuss what supply side policies are. Number one are tax reforms. Government will reduce indirect taxes as well as direct taxes. When indirect taxes will be reduced or will be abolished, the cost of production of firms will go down. And when cost of production of firms will go down, aggregate supply curve would shift rightward, creating all those positive aspects which I have already discussed. On the contrary, when direct taxes will be reduced, this will give an incentive to work, incentive to invest to the firms. As a result, firms will invest more. Not only local firms, foreign investments would also be attracted when the tax reforms would be introduced. Especially when direct taxes will be reduced, foreign investments would be attracted. Apart from that, government will introduce trade union reforms. We know that controlling trade unions is very important because trade unions at full employment level become too strong and they demand higher wages, they demand other monetary benefits so high that the cost of production of firm increases rapidly and they have to cut back on their output and they have to lay off the workers. That's why controlling trade unions is important, especially at full employment level. Because at full employment level, trade unions gain too much power to push the wages up, which results in lower GDP and higher unemployment. Therefore, it is important to introduce trade union reforms to control the trade unions. Thirdly, government will invest on creating human capital. Government will invest on training of the people and retraining of the people. When workers would be trained or workers would be retrained, this will help in three ways. With the training, efficiency or productivity of the workers will increase, which will increase the economic growth rate. Secondly, the supply of workers will increase with the help of retraining. And when supply of workers will increase, the wage rates will go down. As a result, cost of production would fall. Right? So, controlling the training the workers is benefiting in multiple ways. Then apart from it, government will have to regulate monopolies and oligopolies. We already know that monopolies deliberately underproduce to keep prices high. Monopoly deliberately create barriers to entry to avoid competition. And monopolies and oligopolies are involved in many other negative activities sometimes. Therefore, it is very important for the government to regulate them. Apart from this, government will attract more local and foreign investments so that more firms enter into the industry to increase competition and to reduce the power of monopolies and oligopolies. As we know that monopolies and oligopolies deliberately underproduce to keep prices high, when competition will be increased, the total output of the economy and employment of the workers will increase. So these imperfect markets have to be regulated. However, those markets where there is a potential of competition, where there are large number of small firms, government would better deregulate them. Government will reduce its controls from them, for example, price controls. Right? If the price controls would be withdrawn, the firms would realize that now they can charge any price for their product they want. So there will be an incentive to innovate. There would be an incentive to invent. As a result, more investments will come, and again, GDP will increase, unemployment rate would fall. So, deregulation of that industry where there is potential of competition and where there are large number of firms would always help. On the contrary, regulation of monopolies and oligopolies is important in some cases. Apart from that, government will also use the policy of privatization, because privatization in the long run increases competition, increases GDP in many respects, and unemployment level is also reduced. Mind it that sometimes we believe that immediate effect of privatization could be a fall in GDP and a rise in unemployment. But the long run effect of privatization is an increase in GDP and an increase in employment. Perhaps you know or not, privatization does not only mean that selling of government firms to private sector. Privatization also means that those fields where government was initially a monopoly, now government is allowing private sector also to come into that field and start working. As a result, due to privatization, competition increases, number of firms increases, GDP increases, unemployment rate actually falls due to privatization in the long run. Then government would liberalize the market, which means that it would remove all unnecessary controls from the market. So give a room to firms so they can invest more and produce more according to their own will. Liberalization usually means that removing unnecessary controls. Then apart from that, the government can reduce import tariffs in some cases. For example, government will reduce tariffs or import duties from productive imports and will impose duties or tariffs on non-productive imports. As a result, productive imports will increase, non-productive imports would fall, cost of production would fall, and that would also help the firms in producing and investing. So these were the few examples of supply side policies. Apart from that, government will spend on physical infrastructure. For example, we already know that in Pakistan, there is a great lack of physical infrastructure. There is no enough power, there is no enough water, there is no enough other facilities to build a proper physical infrastructure, build proper industrial sites to attract local investments and foreign investments. So it is the responsibility of the government, and it is very much required that government should spend on physical infrastructure and try to improve it. Government will also improve legal infrastructure, right? Which means that government would improve its laws, government will reduce corruption and these types of things, so that uh, more investments will come into the economy, right? Government will spend on discovery of natural resources, which is a very important point. For example, we know that Pakistan in this field is lagging behind. Balochistan, the province of Balochistan, we already know, is full of minerals and gases which are still undiscovered by the government because we don't have that much resources. Apart from that, government would also spend on technological advancement and research and development because technological advancement is very much required for the economic growth. In this era, we already know that only those countries can achieve higher economic growth which whose main focus is on technology. For example, the 5G technology invented or innovated by the China is making a problem for the US because China is the only one which is capable of 5G technology. And 5G technology, we all know, will revolutionize the methods of production, the system of everything. And China is going to introduce it in the future, but the US is lagging behind in that, and that is one of the reasons why these days US is after China, right? This is one of the reasons. I can tell you many, but for the time being, it's over from me. These were the supply side policies which will shift the aggregate supply curve rightward, which will shift the long run aggregate supply curve rightward, which means the potential of the economy will increase and GDP growth rate or economic growth will increase. Thank you very much. I hope you understand my points. I hope you understand now what the supply side policies are. Keep in touch with Tafsel and me in order to have more insight of different topics. Thank you very much.